Thank you. Okay, there we go. The joys of trying to do a hybrid presentation. Sorry about that. I guess we will have to go back and re-record all that. I'll have Liam Neeson do the voiceover. Back, we were just going through our agenda for today. We'll have some accountability updates. There's lots of accountability right now. We also have communication strategies related to both your net dashboard that's upcoming as well as maybe your past results, but really just in general communicating to your stakeholders. And then we're going to have our short break and then assessment update from Stephen and Marcus. Just to start off with a little thought. Your mind in thought mode. This is a quote: "The most valuable insights aren't always found in the raw data. It's the context, interpretation, and nuanced understanding that truly define the significance of the information." So this is going to be a through line. So just in terms, turn to your thought partner, if you're at home, just kind of think to yourself, or at work, I should say, what are your thoughts on this? You have the raw data. We get tons of data, but what is the context you're dealing with right now? And what might you be thinking to share with your educational partners back at your school or your district? What's going to be significant that you want to share with them? So just take a minute to think about what that might be. I think this is the area where, if you're the accountability or superintendent leader, it's really critical right now moving forward with the dashboard coming out to really have an understanding of what is your specific context. It's easy to get caught up, and I know that some folks have very active community members who will come in and try to define the story for you before you can even define it for yourself. But it's a critical time to really set the narrative, but that narrative requires some honesty and some transparency. Things are not always golden and happy and wonderful. We have challenges. We have to acknowledge those. But I think the key element is the ability to be honest and open about where we are, but also what our plans are for the future. So we'll have some more conversation about this throughout. We'll have some opportunity to share at our tables and also in breakout rooms if you want to join those. But we'll get to those in just a minute. So I'm going to just go through some of the materials, and I do want to suggest, if you're here in person, you may also want to go back to your email and join our Canvas page, open that up, and also there's a link to the Zoom in case you want to use the Zoom for responding or monitoring the chat yourself. Let me just share what's on our Canvas page today. We have a Zoom link for today at the very top. So if you're in person, you may just want to open that up so you can see what's going on in the chat or respond. But also, we have some opportunities to respond to a poll that we want to get you to join us. Also, the slide presentation is available there. We'll post a recording, as always, within about 24 hours. We're time stamping all the different sections. So if there's something we cover that you want to go back to, it should be really easy to find it later. And then just to break out of the agenda, we also have our modules page over here that you may look to find what else we have loaded up here. So right now we've got a flyer for our DA convening, which is taking place in March. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's interactive. So if you're interested in joining our differentiated assistance convening for districts on March 6th and 7th, there's a link there for you to register. And that's open to everybody, not just the districts that are identified for differentiated assistance. We encourage everyone to join. And also we have a new CAASPP coordinator training flyer. That's next Monday. And also just an update on the various trainings we have. So back to the presentation. So just a reminder of what the purpose of this meeting is. Really, we want to provide all of our LEAs in LA County with the latest information in the areas of data, assessment, and accountability. Always, we put the caveat in that it's only as current as of yesterday. And literally, I was emailing with CDE yesterday about a very specific point. And so their take on it as of yesterday was this, right? And next week, it might be something different. So we always try to keep you apprised of the latest. but things do change, and always be mindful that we will send out updates as these occur. And for today, all your questions that you answer or ask in the chat, we'll try to address them in real time. It's even harder now that we're doing it in hybrid to actually answer them immediately, but we will get to them. If we don't get to them while we're here, we will make sure that they're covered in a subsequent follow-up that we send out in our DAAN digest. Also, though, note if you're in the room, be patient. If you have a question, please just raise your hand. We have multiple mics, so we would like to have you ask it on mic so everybody in the room can hear it, but also be online. So just reminders, upcoming meetings, we meet again February 6th. Again, our meetings are still going to remain hybrid. We have a good crowd today. We'd love to see more. I know a lot of people probably have a lot going on, so leaving their office in December is kind of hard, but hopefully February you'll be able to join us in person. And we are continuing to really emphasize having people here in person to connect for both networking purposes and for moral support at this time of, a lot of increased accountability. So let me give you some data and accountability updates. I'm going to start by introducing our good friend Sumin Chow from the MOS unit, and she's going to give us an update on the OPTEL.
Thank you so much, Evan and the DAAN team, and thank you all in the room and on the Zoom today for allowing me to come and share some of the latest and greatest updates with you on the OPTEL, the Observation Protocol for Teachers of English Learners. This is something that has been in the works and in development for years now, and so we're very pleased to say that, last month, the State Board of Education was able to review the OPTEL and to approve it. And so we received an update from CDE, from the multilingual unit, the department, last Friday. Hello? Oh, is that better? Thank you so much. And so to that effect, I'm very pleased to be able to share with you some of the latest updates. You are the first on the ground that we're able to share this with. We will be able to go a bit more in depth this Friday when we have our own multilingual academic programs leadership network meeting. But as we do like to work together with our data and data literacy and accountability group, and work together to serve. I know that some of the programs and some of the data pieces do work to build this narrative that Evan was mentioning in terms of looking at the data and then the why behind and then how best to support. And so that being said, wanted to go into a nutshell overview, right, of the OPTEL for those of you who are newer to the group or who are new on the scene in terms of what this means. Basically, on or before December 31st, the department has been tasked with, through legislation, the development of a standardized English language teacher observation tool, right? And so this has been dictated by by Ed Code, by policy, and it's essentially something that's been put forward to move us towards a little bit of a centralized and standardized effort as we are looking to support students in reclassification. And so when we look at the self-report data, right? So there was a survey that was disseminated to districts across the state. So it wasn't just Region 11, LA County, it was across the state, right? And so we had several districts and charters provide some insight and information about the ways that they fulfilled criterion 2 of the reclassification process for students. And so they said everything from teacher opinion recommendation, grades was one of them, assessments and evaluation. Some districts mentioned specific evaluation forms such as the solemn, right, which were used, but essentially the long and the short is that criterion 2 was fulfilled through several different ways. So if you look at it from the perspective of a student who was moving from district to district, the measure changed, right? The bar changed. And so in an effort to create a tool and create a support for districts who are working to support their students along English language development, the OPTEL was then created, field tested, and then recently approved, right? And so here was the timeline of the process of the field testing, the validation, the guidance materials and information, which are going to be published very shortly and shared with the field, so that there can be an initiation of communication as well as training for teachers, for practitioners, as well as information for community members and partners who might be interested in shifts to the process. And as a review, right, just a brief review, when you look at the 4 criterion that factor into reclassification for a student, first of all, criterion 1 is the assessment of English language proficiency. And Stephen has been a great ally and a supporter and a partner when we look at LPAC, right, the administration of the LPAC and how some of those pieces are fulfilled through our state assessment. And then criterion 2 is the teacher evaluation piece, which I spoke to as being locally determined and essentially like across the board, not uniform, right? So we think of a parent or a student traveling from state to state or moving, and there really wasn't that consistency. And then criterion 3 is the parent consultation piece. And criterion 4 is the basic skills relative to English proficient students to ensure that there's access, right, to content and to opportunities for our students in criteria 4. So when we look at the OPTEL, it really does deal with criteria 2 and criterion 3. So those 2 pieces would be fulfilled through the implementation of this new tool. The tool itself is aligned to the California ELD standards. And just in a quick review, it does address part 1, which is interacting in meaningful ways, and part 2, learning how English works, right? The cool colors and the warm colors of the ELD standards that were in effect since 2012, right? Across the board, some of the measures that were used previously in districts didn't align as tightly to the ELD standards. So there was an intentionality as the state looked at this, this tool, this resource as a guide. And so looking at part 1, really addressing the what language is used to organize thoughts into words, phrases, sentences, and connected text. Like, how do students work with each other, right, to make meaning, collaborate, interpret, and to produce. And then the how language is used, part 2, which is essentially how do students unpack meaning using language? And then how do students synthesize, condense, summarize, right? And connect their ideas using some of these linguistic structures. And so when you look at the observation tool, and I'm going to ask our DAAN team, or I can do that for us later too, there is a link to the OPTEL in the notes. And if you could drop that in the chat or email after, that would be great. It is a resource that's currently posted on the CDE website. And as soon as there is an update to the resources that accompany the OPTEL, those will also be on that webpage. But you can see that the new tool has an area where teachers of English learners will be able to indicate the receptive skills that are observed, as well as the productive linguistic skills that are observed in a classroom observation, right? And there are some frames in which they can indicate where students were observed, in which content area, as well as the interaction type. Are they being observed as a whole group lesson, or is this something that they're seeing in a small group setting or in a one-to-one? And then some items to consider is whether or not the student is on an individualized plan, a 504 plan, and the dates that are observed, as well as the grade level. I know that there may be questions from the field, and there definitely are, as we're rolling this out and sharing this with our administrators who will be tasked with the review of this and application of this tool. You know, in the elementary setting and in the secondary setting, there are questions. I just kind of want to front load something that people are chewing on and thinking about is, well, how many teachers, especially in a secondary setting, will be required, right, to administer the OPTEL? And there really isn't clarity, and we're waiting for guidance from CDE in regards to those best practices and those guides. But that is something that is out there. But essentially, we want to make sure that students are being observed in their content level or in their content area to ensure that they have access, right, to the learning opportunities that are afforded. And also, something that should be noted as well is that there is a parent consultation piece. So it's essentially a consolidation of what was traditionally two forms, right? One for the teacher observation and one for the parent consult, but this is one tool for both purposes. And so when you look, there are designated spots for the consultation, documentation of notes, as well as spots where the teacher can indicate whether or not they would recommend reclassification, the moving forward, and then a spot for parents. Based on some feedback that actually our group of educators were able to uplift to CDE, there is language that's been adjusted. And I feel like some of the feedback comes from people who were in the Zoom. I saw some names kind of run by the screen, and I really want to express my appreciation and to assure you that when you give us feedback at LACOE, and we go to RAN, when we go to BCN, when we go to our state, we also represent you in the way that your suggestions matter. And so that being said, there was feedback where originally in an earlier draft, it says that the student's teacher needed to sign, and then the parent signature was required. But as a result of some of the feedback that we were able to uplift to CDE, there was a sentence that was added in a later draft that that basically clarifies that failure to obtain a parent signature does not preclude a student from reclassification. The requirement per ed code is the consult. So does that happen? Does it happen on the phone? Does it happen via Zoom? Does it happen in person? But does it happen? And that documentation of the conversation in the consult is what is key. And so that being said, in the same way that LEAs have been able to document and give evidence to that critical piece of the process, that is that's one adjustment that has been shared with us that we've been able to share with CDE for feedback. And so that's something to also note. And essentially, in a nutshell, that is the update on the OPTEL tool. Are there still more questions in there? Absolutely. And we're also asking them of CDE as well too. We do forecast that there will be resources and updates for the rollout of the OPTEL. And so as that is available to us, we look forward to sharing that with you. Any questions? Oh, wonderful. So I see, when can we start using this tool? This tool has been approved, and so you can absolutely start using the tool, but I would say that there is a process by which if any of the four measures to determine the criteria are shifted, then there is a process and protocol to share that with your DLAC, with your ELAC, with your educational partners. And so without going too into the weeds, there is a process, but the tool itself has been approved as a recommended tool by the state board.
We also had the question, is the OPTEL going to be a form or a form on a system?
So the OPTEL is currently a form, and it is a PDF that is downloadable. But that being said, I know that there are conversations about creating more accessible avenues digitally for this tool to be utilized, because I know that especially in the past 3 years, we've been able to shift from paper forms to a more digital format.
So one LEA asks, we have classified staff that we hire as EL coordinators to oversee the reclassification process. This clearly says teacher evaluation on the form. Oh, just shot down. Will it be allowable for classified staff to complete the OPTEL with training?
So I think that that's a really good question. It is a teacher evaluation form. That being said, I think that when you look at the reclassification of students, it is a consult and it is a process. So there can definitely be more voices in the room, but this is an observation protocol for teachers of English learners.
And then we have two similar questions. I think, is the OPTEL going to be required for reclassification in the future or just an additional tool that's optional?
So this is a tool that is recommended by CDE at this time. There isn't a requirement at this time for the use of the form, but it has been highly recommended by our partners at the state level in the interest of looking at it from the student point of view and making sure that there is an opportunity for clarity and transparency as a student may move from elementary to middle school, right? Vertically across the system or from district to district.
We have one more question. A couple of folks in the chat have indicated they're already utilizing the form online to collect the information. Also, just it does elicit the need to look at your reclassification process, if nothing else, even if it's not mandatory yet. But then question if the signatures from the teachers can be collected digitally.
So that was a clarifying question that was asked at our last state meeting, and digital signatures and e-signatures are acceptable for the form. They said that that was fine too. And then our group of practitioners and experts pushed even a little bit further about the question regarding the parents. And so, you know, in the same way, e-signatures will work for this form as well too.
Just question, it's on the CD website, it's showing as a draft.
Yes.
Is it going to remain draft? How much longer would it remain draft?
It won't remain draft for very long. They're actually working very diligently to publish without that draft watermark. And in addition, also post resources and tools for districts and charters. And recognizing that it's not a requirement as of January 1st, as some legislation dictates for other instances, because they realize that this will be a process and that it does take time and thought to roll out a change such as this. And so that is the word from our state.
And here's another good question. If we decide to use the OPTEL, the process to update our reclassification is that we need to take it to the DLAC and then to the board, correct?
So yes, in full transparency, it would be good to make sure that that communication and the opportunity for feedback was provided to all of our educational partners, and that does include DLAC, parents, community, and ultimately the board.
Are there any questions in the room? I've got a mic here waiting. It's hot, it's ready to go.
And thank you so much for the questions on the Zoom.
Okay, well, I think that's it. Sumin, thank you so much for joining us. And if we have additional questions for clarification, we can send them to you and get it out in our next DAAN Digest.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
And did you plug your meeting this week?
Oh, you know what? I feel like I mentioned it, but I didn't really share in depth. We do have a MAP meeting that's happening on Zoom this Friday from 9 to 11:30, 12. And if you are able to make it, we will have our first in-person session for 2024 that will happen in February. And so if you can't make the Zoom meeting, we would love for you to join us in real life. And we will also be looking forward to welcoming additional continued collaboration with our DAAN partners. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yay. Love having, there's always so much overlap between assessment, accountability, and then our Title III English learner programs, it's like we are constantly in each other's offices. So I'm sure you're experiencing that within your LEA as well. So um, you'll probably see more of Zoom in before the year is done. Okay, so some additional accountability updates. These are in no particular order. These are things that came out through RAN, and so they may apply to some of you and not to others, but let's throw them all out. So this was kind of a surprise to me, the college and career indicator, which is personally my favorite indicator, and it's of course back on the dashboard for the first time this year. But our RAN meeting, the CDE expressed some concern that they have seen, and it really didn't come through the data. It actually was a presentation from a student information system vendor that had them alerted that some LEAs are using the college credit only, which is in the course field for fall 2. They're identifying courses as college credit only, and what they're using it for is to actually capture any student who takes a course on their own, then comes back and reports it to the district and says, "Oh, I went to Mount Sac and I took this class," and they're like, "Oh, okay, we'll report it." And they said, really, in the spirit of the college career indicator, the idea is it's a measure of how a district or a school is providing a broad course of study, and so it should be not just it's measured through student performance, but it's really supposed to be about what the school is doing to facilitate a broad course of study. So kind of picking off a random student as they come back is not in the spirit of that. So they were going to give more clarification of the field. I think everyone's innocent in this case. Like we were just like, oh, we can report like if a student's going during the summer and taking a course, we want to capture that, and I think that there needs to be clarification. So it's going to be forthcoming through CalPADS or the accountability division, but look for that. But just I'm curious in the chat, do you have a course like this that you're reporting completions from this community college or even a 4-year school that maybe something that falls into this field? And I ask not to out you, but rather I'd like to know, because the more opportunity we can share what people are doing, to give a better insights from the field, the easier it will be for CDE to craft a response or guidance to this. Because I don't think they really fully understood what was going on. They clearly got caught off guard by this. So if you have a class, drop it in the chat and just let us know. What do you think it is? This is distinct from the dual enrollment course. So if you're offering a dual enrollment course on campus and that's a different code 24, those are fine. But these are for college credit only. So if a student went and took an art history class and came back to you, and it gets tricky because I think generally speaking, you're going to have your counselor give approval for it, but they're looking for more things that are, hey, we're setting up a course through our local community college for our have students who've never attended college, to give them a taste of what it's like, and it's facilitated. All the students are from your school. Those are the things that they see as being the college credit only, I believe. But drop in the chat anything. We'll go back and review and take an opportunity to collate and give them to the CDE for some additional thoughts. So a couple student groups that are being updated for the purposes of accountability. So transitional kindergarten, up until now, transitional kindergarten, and I have some CalPADS friends in the room, they know this, it used to be a program, right? Now it's not a program. Starting this year, TK is going to be its own grade level, which is great for many things. So, we've always looked at TK as a part of a 2-year kindergarten program. So in that sense, they are kindergartners. However, we hadn't reported them separately, so it was impossible to kind of separate the two for the purposes of accountability and for data. So they do appear on the dashboard. TK gets included as kindergartners, right, currently, in the suspension rate indicator, the chronic absenteeism indicator, the academic indicator if you have a pair share situation, and then they are excluded from the LP, and including any kindergartner who may have had a prior year's assessment and a summative assessment in the LPAC. They exclude kindergarten altogether currently. So the question is, now that we're capturing them, what do you think? Your thoughts. And this is not determined, and this is why I'm asking for feedback now. Again, and let's take a moment in the room, and if you're online, you can just utilize the chat. Should TK be excluded from the state indicators like chronic absenteeism, suspension, the academic indicator? now that they can be distinguished. And in this case, we'd have TK included and identified in the grade span. So instead of chronic absenteeism being K through 8, it would be TK through 8. So what are your thoughts on that? And then alternatively, should TK be added to the LP? It's kind of a mix and match, right? You may make a lot of gains between TK and K with regards to your English language development, and that could be a boon, right? So I take a minute, turn to folks at your table, or if you're online, utilize the chat, and I'll have my colleagues share out some of the thoughts that appear in the chat. What are your thoughts on how we might be able to incorporate, or should we incorporate? And there will be some additional conversations around this with the accountability division at the state. Turn and talk. Okay, well, we had some good conversation in the room, and maybe Hillary, if you could read some of the online comments, and maybe some folks in the room would want to share their thoughts as well.
Yeah, in our in the chat, I see that we have kind of 3 buckets here. We have some people very clearly saying, yes, they can be included. However, there are some points where people feel that TK should not be taking the LPAC. And then you have some that kind of are they elaborated to kind of point out that there's concern that since parents may feel that TK is an optional program, and thus they take their students in and out of school and the impact that that may have to them. However, talking with some other colleagues here, we also got the sense that the exposure to the test is also significant, and at the very least, the exposure plays a role in performance as well.
Does anybody in the room want to chime in? We got a runner here if you need it. Okay. Well, I think you tapped into a lot of things that were expressed by the RAN group too, and it was kind of a mixed bag. We had an exercise. So yeah, the LPAC it's very difficult with kindergartners, right? It's like, so you take it down a year earlier, it gets even more difficult with just the lack of familiarity with the adults. You know, they suddenly can get very shy and quiet. So that certainly is a consideration, although it would be the first year of the 2 for the LP. So, you know, your baseline might be lower with more growth expected. The familiarity would help. I think also that certainly chronic absenteeism, you see kindergarten is the highest, the grade with the highest chronic absenteeism, typically, that followed by grade 9, interestingly. So you do, I think everyone's a little concerned if you throw TK in and the perception is it's not a mandatory program. Boy, that could be really difficult to rein in the chronic absenteeism for that grade. Thank you for sharing, and we will add anything else. We'll add it into our follow-up Q&A. I do want to go back to that, just the questions. I saw a couple questions in the chat while we were talking here related to college credit. So these are not dual enrollment or articulated courses, and these are college, as I understand it, college credit only. So it wouldn't be a student coming back and claiming high school credit for a college credit course taken, but rather a student who took a college credit course for enrichment purposes. And they, and that's where it gets tricky, because you might have a student might come back and you can say, oh, well, this course actually does meet certain requirements. You may add it to the student's transcript, and it could maybe even fulfill a portion of their graduation credits. But what they're trying to say is if it's not a course that the LEA helped set up, that they facilitated in some way, then it really shouldn't be seen as a part of the broad course of study that district or school has developed. So it's really, you're looking at like, oh, we've had an MOU with the local community college. These are the courses. And I can think of a lot of samples ourselves. We had a program in Santa Monica called the Young Collegians, and the students took classes that weren't for high school credit. They were college credit courses over the summer. And it gave them all, these were students who were, all their families, they would be first in their family to go to attend college. So they were kind of orienting them towards higher ed. So they weren't going to be getting high school credit for it, but they were getting the experience. And it was all exclusively our students who were in that program. So I think that's what they're looking for with the college credit only. But like I said, they need to get some clarification out there. There was certainly a lot of buzz in the room when we talked about it. People say, well, I think everybody's kind of all over the board because we haven't had a lot of clarity up until now. So another group that's getting a lot more attention is long-term English learners. So this group, the definition was recently changed. Well, a new definition was added. So SB 114, which passed last year, amended Ed Code 52052 to include long-term English learners as a required student group specifically for accountability. So the need to have them on the dashboard and represented within the LCAP. So that definition is kind of unique, right? It's a pupil who has not attained English language proficiency within 7 years of initial classification as an English learner. So now you start thinking, well, now you can classify a student as a TK. So you could have, based on this definition, by 6th grade, the student would be included within that LTEL group. But that, of course, differs from our existing definition, which I think most people are familiar with, that's defined in Ed Code 313.1. You also see it on the dashboard for our LTEL counts. And so we wanted to clarify the CDE has confirmed the two are going to coexist for the time being because they can't change without some legislative action. So just know that the thing to know is that for the purposes of the LCAP and on the dashboard, you're going to want to have the definition identified as the 7 years since initial classification, which makes it easier to define. And you're going to need to define it for the purposes of your LCAP sooner than probably they're going to need to define it in this upcoming LCAP. Note that for the purposes of accountability, similar to foster youth and homeless youth, it's going to be 15 or more for a district or county office, 30 per charter, that will be used for accountability purposes, for identification, for eligibility for CSI or ATSI, or for differentiated assistance. And also, they won't appear on the dashboard. So don't expect to see LTELs pulled out separately on this upcoming dashboard. So this presents a little bit of a conundrum because you're going to be writing an LCAP. You're going to have to set some baseline data, some metrics for your LTELs, but you're not going to have the dashboard to refer to. So there's going to be a need to do some additional data crunching at your LEA. And we'll provide more detail working with our LCAP unit in some upcoming trainings. But here's one of the things that's undetermined yet. And I think this is kind of interesting. Again, a pro con. So in the chat or at your table, what are your thoughts? Should the LTELs be included within the English learner group? So in other words, it would be a both and. I'm going to have my English learners including the LTELs as one group, and then I'm going to have my LTELs report out separately. Or should they be reported out totally separately? So I'm going to have my English learners who aren't LTELs and my LTELs. And so you can see there might be some implications even at like a school level, where if you're at a high school, maybe the majority of your English learners are LTELs, right? So then what happens? Your EL group might not have sufficient numbers to actually register on the dashboard. So then it only would be your LTEL group. So take a minute. What do you think are preferences, pros or cons, and use the chat to kind of share out what your thoughts are on this. Where do you think, what would be your preferred methodology, whether to share them as two separate groups or inclusive, LTELs being inclusive within the English learner group?
Well, I've been looking in the chat here. There is an overwhelming majority that are kind of saying within the EL group. However, with that being said, there are a few people that are, a few of our participants are saying that, they should be separate. And some of the reasons that I'm seeing is that they're a different type of EL student and should be monitored differently and independently. And then once again, the people that are saying they should be included are also saying, you can't always disaggregate it and separate it.
Yeah, I think there's some really very interesting insights shared here, just even applying the MTSS framework some thoughts. There's no answer right now. I'm collecting all this as data points of my own to go back when we have additional discussions with CDE on these things. I guess the other thing that I've asked, which is another outstanding question, is as it stands now, the English Learner Progress Indicator, the ELPI, only measures English learners, right? So you're only concerned about that group, that the only group held accountable. Would then LTELs be held accountable separately on? So, and almost by definition, by the old definition, it's students who aren't making progress, right? And these students, right? They were in my continuation school, and they would see my test person coming, and they would run the other way. So it was hard enough to test them. They weren't probably having the best effort. So if they were being, it could be a real challenge if it was separated out as a separate student group within the LP. So this is all to come. I do appreciate your thoughts in the chat and those of you who are talking here, and we'll try to do a summary of all these, kind of give a sense of how people leaned in on this one. But yeah, it's a great question. I do think for the purposes of calculating the data, if you're going to be responsible for calculating data for your LCAP this year, at least this definition is a little bit easier to gather, right? You're not going to be dependent on the CDE releasing a data file that tells you who your long-term English learners are and your at-risk long-term English learners. You can actually use a fairly simple definition. So, and I know there are some LEAs within LA County who are involved in the development of this language for EdCode, and I think it does help make it kind of simple. So a couple of updates on the local indicators, and I'm sure you're not all dashboard coordinators, but if you are, just wanted to remind you. So local indicator priority 1, and there's one LEA here who's like, we were having this conversation. You have an opportunity right now within local indicator priority 1, which is your teacher assignment data, which this year it's kind of unique. The CD has to report your teacher assignment data on the dashboard, and they have to show the percentage of teachers with clear credentials. And then you see also in the same little measure, you'll see the county and the state percentage. And so it was pretty simple, but of course the teacher assignment monitoring uses a federal definition of teachers who are out of field and teachers who are ineffective. And it doesn't necessarily align with what the California Teacher Credentialing Commission identifies as allowable. So we have all sorts of local assignment options. So you have an opportunity, and I really encourage LEAs to take advantage of this, to set a little more context, because I can already kind of see the responses from certain folks who say, what, only 85% of our teachers are clear, with the assumption being that means the other 15% are not clear and not understanding, well, actually they do have credentials, right? And they have credentials, and maybe they're teaching on a local assignment option. Maybe you have an independent study which has to utilize or leverage your teachers in a way that, it's allowed by EdCode, but it doesn't meet the federal definition. So I encourage you to take advantage of the optional narrative for priority 1. You have to get that in by December 14th. If it's not in by then, once it's published, you can't go back and add it. So definitely consider that, add some context, and also talking about what you're doing to increase the percentage of clear credentials. Because it's a challenging time also, just in terms of finding teachers who are credentialed. We have definitely a demand for teachers right now, and so there's a challenge there too. So take advantage of that. Also, this one might have slid under the radar. This actually got passed back in March, but there was an update to priority 6, and it applies this year. So that's the key thing to remember. Not on the dashboard; it's about to be published, but on the data you're collecting now, and you're going to not have to report out on. So the priority 6, which is the school climate, was updated, and now the survey has to be given on an annual basis. So before it was at least every other year, but now you have to give it annually. So if you gave it last year and you thought you're off the hook this year, you're not. So you have to make sure you have your survey going out this year to all the grade spans that you serve. To at least one grade, I should say, at least one grade within the grade spans that you serve, that you have to do annually. And this is where you're collecting, at least for the purposes of the survey, just the data on school safety and connectedness. And so the other piece that's going to be unique is that you're going to have to report out this on disaggregated groups within that local indicator. So before you didn't have to, right? Now it's demanded. Now this presents a unique challenge. So I reached out to the California schools who administer the Healthy Kids Survey, and I asked them, do you have a plan in place? And they do have a plan in place. They actually have disaggregation already. Note, though, that it's not perfect because, for instance, for your socioeconomically disadvantaged students, since what they used to do, because this is unique to the Healthy Kids Survey, but I know a lot of our LEAs use this, the Healthy Kids Survey relies on anonymity, right? And so they have to rely on questions that will serve as a proxy for certain things. So before they would ask students, do you receive a free lunch at school? Well, now everybody receives a free lunch at school, so they can't use that any longer. So they have a question related to your parents' high school educate or your parents' education. They can only really give that question in secondary. Elementary kids are not going to have any idea, and probably in secondary. So some of the disaggregated groups are going to be a little more challenging, but just know that Healthy Kids works very hand in hand with the CDE. So they have thought this through, so that it's going to be as disaggregated as possible. But if you're using another tool, including maybe your own survey for the purposes of answering these questions, make sure you're prepared to disaggregate it in some way, because it is unique, and you're going to need to report that out by your significant student groups within your LEA. Okay, some dashboard updates. It's that time. Hopefully some of you have been having a chance to check in on your dashboard, and all things are looking good. I think we have seen definitely some improvements from the prior years, specifically around chronic absenteeism. But just a quick overview for those of you who maybe are new to accountability. The idea is that this is all part of a big system. The dashboard gets published. There are these system of support determinations, both for differentiated assistance and then for ESSA, whether it's comprehensive support and improvement or additional targeted support and improvement, ATSI. Those all come out either immediately on the release of the dashboard or shortly thereafter. That's the CSI, ATSI determinations. And then you're in your process probably already sharing last year's data, but you need to make plans, whether it's the LCAP or your SIPSA at the school level, taking into account the dashboard, right? And so all of that gets put into place, rolling into your next year, and you have a plan of action for your continuous improvement. And then it all starts over again. The data start being collected. We see our outcomes. And now by next year, we'll start to see the dashboard publication moved up earlier in the year, which will help accommodate this in a more timely fashion. So you're not already halfway through the year when you get your data. But so this is the process behind it. So I wanted to cover a couple of additional topics. So because I know these come up, people have some questions, especially because it's been 4 years since we've seen a dashboard with colors, right, other than purple. And so it's a good refresher. And even some of these are challenges, right? That like, wait, how many different 5x5s are there? And it's good to know that there are places to find these. And if you need to share these, if you're trying to inform your schools, their site levels, to help them understand the difference, where hopefully will help you. So first of all, the 5x5 grid, which is going to determine the colors. There are two primary 5x5 grids. There's a traditional 5x5 grid, which we have on the left here. And as you can see, it's got a lot more potential variation to it, right? So it's used for grad rate, chronic absenteeism, suspension, the English learner progress indicator on the current dashboard. And what's notable about it is at some levels, like for instance, if your status is high, right, that's your status for the year, your change from the prior year could move you into one of 4 different colors, right? So you could maintain and be green, or you could change, you could decline somewhat and be yellow, or decline significantly and you could be orange, right? Alternatively, you could go up. If you increase significantly, you could move into blue. So there's a lot more movement. It's designed to be to take into account both your status and your growth, right? So that's the idea. But the downside on this, the traditional 5x5 has been that if you have small student groups, particularly at schools, this can happen. They actually are subject to like bigger swings, right? If you've got 100 students, a few students could swing you up or down one way. So a couple of years ago, they developed a balanced 5x5. This is expressly for the academic indicator. And you can see they kind of address that by having only potentially 2 colors on each line. So that's why there's a difference there, and it only applies to the academic indicator. But it's helpful to understand the why behind it. Additionally, there are different 5x5s with different cut scores by grade span. And I didn't include it. We'll add it to the Canvas dashboard, but there is a 5x5 page on the CDE with all the current 5x5s. Nothing has changed from before with regards to the cut scores. They're all the same as they were in 2019, with the exception of the LP, which only just added the change cut scores this year. But there is a link, and we'll put that in the Canvas page. But to address that wild fluctuation, they do have this 3x5, and I know this question comes up. It's like, what does the 3x5 mean? So the 3x5 is kind of invisible. It happens behind the scenes. This is all you really need to know. If you have an LEA, a school, or a specific student group where the N value, which is going to fluctuate depending on the indicator, if it's below 150, it can be subject to this 3x5, which really is designed to benefit those small groups, that big fluctuation. So essentially what they're doing is they're removing the two outermost columns, like increased significantly or decreased significantly from the prior year. They aren't going to be visible, and this is where people get kind of thrown. They'll see the percentage that a population decreases, for instance, and they're like, well, that was insignificant. Why didn't they drop down into the red? Because they're looking at the 5x5 and they're thinking they should be dropping 2 levels, let's say. But in fact, what's taking place is there's a 3x5 being applied, and it is kind of invisible in the background. However, you can access this information once the dashboard is published. It's in the additional report section, and you go to the 5x5 placement. You can drill down into the detailed data, and that's where you'll see applied 3x5, yes, no. And it actually will help clarify if you're not understanding why sometimes you may have an orange when you're thinking, shouldn't it be a red? It may be because the 3x5 was applied, and that's where you'd find that out. This year, we expect to have both a decrease in our school districts identified for differentiated assistance, and we'll be welcoming some of our charter schools into differentiated assistance in the whole process. But because of that, I want to just kind of set the baseline. I know most of our districts as of last year, because so many of our districts were eligible for differentiated assistance, probably already know this, but technical assistance, aka differentiated assistance, is part of our local control funding formula. It is intended to assist LEAs to address the underlying causes that lead to low student outcomes while strengthening the LEA's overall ability to evaluate the effectiveness of strategies and programs. It's a systemic approach. That's why when we approach our differentiated assistance eligible districts, it's all about building systems and looking at systems and challenging, is your data accurate? Do you have a system in place to measure that? Do you have a strong MTSS foundation? So it's not a label. It's not even really published anywhere. We get a file sent directly to the county superintendent for all eligible LEAs, but it doesn't get published anywhere. Of course, people can figure it out if they know the criteria, but it isn't something like program improvement where it used to be a stigma attached to it. So that's the important thing to remember. And I think really a vast majority of our districts were identified for differentiated assistance last year. And we said this last year, it's really not supposed to be seen as a negative. It's still hard, nobody likes to see their name in there with DA, but it really is a supportive environment. This year, there are going to be new criteria that they had to be adopted by the state board, in so much as we have kind of a hybrid dashboard again. So it is a return for the most part to the prior year status. So if you had any of your local indicators, which are all self-reported, and they don't apply to student groups because they're applicable across all student groups, are in the not met for 2 or more years category. And I can tell you already, just because the local indicators, I think we saw the preview, the first preview shared these, none of our LEAs had that not met for 2 or more years. So that shouldn't be a criteria for any of our LEAs. However, then you start getting into the other priority areas, and this is where we get the change, right? Last year we only had purple, so everything was based on status. But it's good to remember, and I want to make one thing really clear too, when we're talking about eligibility, the indicators are seen in a relationship by priority area for DA, but when it comes to ESSA and CSI, ATSI, each individual indicator is seen differently for the purposes of eligibility. So it's kind of a distinction that sometimes is confusing. So for pupil achievement, if you're red on both indicators, ELA and math, or red on one and orange on the other, that would be one area for eligibility. And then likewise, red on the English learner progress indicator, which of course only applies to your English learner student group. So those are not interchangeable. If you're eligible for English learners for both the LP and the academic indicator, that wouldn't count. You'd have to be identified in another priority area. Pupil engagement is the red on grad rate or chronic absenteeism, so different grade spans accounted for there. Then pupil engagement, or sorry, school climate is red on suspension rate, or the not met for 2 more years on the local indicator. And then finally, the outcomes to a broad course of study this year, like I said, it's kind of a hybrid. So if you are in the college and career indicator, if you're a district or a school that receives that, you're only going to get a status this year. So if you're very low status, that would be a qualifier. So this year, there are 3 methods by which you could be identified as eligible. Method 1 is within the state indicators, only at least one student group meets the criteria in the 2 priority areas. So like I said, academic indicator, you couldn't have your English learner group qualify for both the academic indicator and the LP. Similarly, you couldn't have one student group qualify in both chronic absenteeism and grad rate because they're in the same priority area. So they have to be 2 different priority areas. And then the third methodology are the local indicators only. As I noted, we don't have any districts that are falling into that. But if you do next year, if you're not met this year, next year potentially you could end up in the not met for 2 or more years. And then finally the combination. So you could have a couple of these combined. I don't think that's going to happen to anybody. So just charter schools. I know we have a lot of charter schools who join our meetings, and this is kind of unique. And there was a change, so I just want to make sure everybody's clear on it. If you're at a charter school, so the charter schools will be eligible for differentiated assistance this year based on 2 years worth of dashboards, right? So that's part of the law for charter schools. They did change it because before it used to be 3 out of 4 years. It was very convoluted. Now it's eligibility in 2 consecutive years, and they can be any student groups who are eligible. They don't have to be the same student groups. So now in 2022, you only had the performance level, you only had version method 1, so it's only state indicators, and you didn't have all of the state indicators. So that last year you'd have to go back. Were you eligible? Did you meet the eligibility criteria last year? And we did a quick calculation. We have just over 90 individual schools, charter schools, who met the eligibility criteria last year. So you probably know who you are. And then in 2023, if you meet the criteria for any of your student groups, if you meet the eligibility, you would be identified for differentiated assistance this year. One other thing to note, I didn't include it here, but districts moving forward, there's the AB 114 now says if you're identified for differentiated assistance, you're eligible for 2 years if you're a district or county office. So 2 years, you're going to be working with the county office if you're DA eligible this year. If you are a charter school, it's 1 year's worth of eligibility. So here's the timeline, just a quick review of the charter school DA eligibility. So you can see last year you would have been identified initially. You wouldn't have been notified. It would have been your own understanding. Do we meet the eligibility criteria? And then this year with the final release today, you probably have a good sense. Are any of our groups going to be eligible based on this year's criteria? And then do we have 2 years consecutively? So we'll know in just a week and a little bit. And finally, just to clarify ESSA eligibility for schools, this does come up a lot in distinguishing between the two. You've got the comprehensive support and improvement, obviously, which applies, has 2 different levels. First, they identify schools, high schools with the low graduation rate. So it's a 3-year average of 68% or lower. And then they identify those schools, remaining schools for low performing. So schools identified from among those Title I schools, not already identified for low grad rate. So they will apply the criteria that are identified to the all students category to identify no less than 5%. And this is where it gets kind of confusing. What does that mean? Well, they keep applying the criteria until they get to that 5% of our students, and then they stop, right? And so they can't identify it, right on the dot, but they come close. It does take extra time because of these additional rules to calculate. So we don't expect to see the file of who's eligible for either CSI or ATSI until late January or early February. So I just wanted to note that this is kind of how CSI breaks down a little bit more specifically. So if you aren't identified for CSI low grad rate, that's the initial pass, and they look at all the other schools. So this year they have 3 tranches, I guess I would call it. Schools with all red indicators, schools with all red indicators, but 1 indicator at another status level, or schools that have 5 or more indicators where the majority are red. And because the college career indicator doesn't have a color this year, they're using very low as the proxy for red. So take that into account when you're looking at your dashboard. It's important to note, though, that 3rd level may or may not be applied. So last year they didn't have to apply it. So just be mindful that it may not be applied, but this is the plan. Then for ATSI, anybody, all schools, not Title I, would be who are not identified for low grad rate or for CSI low performing, then get pulled in for consideration for ATSI. And this is applied at the student group level. And again, like I said before, you're looking at individual indicators for this. So unlike the DA process, that all red indicators, they don't look at your math and ELA separately. They look together, they look at them separately. So what's unique about ATSI this year is that you use 2 consecutive years of dashboard data. So they're actually looking at the prior year. So were you eligible for ATSI last year? And then do you meet the eligibility requirements this year? So if you didn't meet them last year, but you meet them this year, that doesn't mean you're ATSI. You'd have to be identified for both years and for the same student group. So that's important to keep in mind. If you're identified this year for ATSI, you'll be eligible for 3 years or until you exit. And a lot of folks have been asking me, what does it mean to exit? And I did reach out to the CDE. They largely waved off my questions because they have their heads down right now. But these are the exit criteria. If you are eligible for CSI low performing or ATSI, you would be eligible if you met the combination of any of the criteria that we put forward. So any of those 3 levels, if you're eligible again or not eligible, and at least 1 indicator for which you are eligible, whether if it's CSI, it would be the school level. If it's ATSI, it's the student group level, needs to have seen an improvement. So it's 1 indicator. So it's kind of the reason that exists is because potentially you could have some fluky things with small student groups where you wouldn't be identified because you wouldn't have an indicator 1 year. So anything that you are at least one of the indicators that you were identified for previously has to see an improvement. So that's an important distinction there. So that improvement would be a 0.1%. So they differ depending on the graduation rate, LP or academic indicators. Questions around that? That is dry as toast, isn't it? I know it's a lot. And I think that, probably more questions will come when you get to the level that you're starting to go, oh, wait, we're eligible now. And I know there are some unanswered questions out there with regards to some stuff for those people who live in the ESSA state plan. So we'll get to those. I'm still waiting for the CD's response on a couple of really deep questions about rigorous support. But at this time, I'd like to bring up my colleague.
Break, or can you go for another 10, 15 minutes? Let's take a break then. We'll come back in 5 minutes. Stretch those legs, get caffeinated. See you shortly, Zoom land. Take another 30 seconds to a minute to kind of get back to our seats. Okay, so as we kind of continue to move along, but maybe transition from some dry toast to a little bit more interaction, we're going to take just a short jaunt here and talk a little bit about, you know, communicating our results. Since we spent some time with the broader landscape and the business rules associated with the dashboard, legislation, different student populations, we wanted to take a moment and not just remind you of the dashboard toolkit and all of the important messaging resources and PDFs and the flyers that are very useful to speak to and both post on websites to kind of keep your educational partners in the loop, but also those dashboard principles. As we mentioned in the beginning, when you're talking about data, specifically when you start to craft your data story, um, using those principles as a foundation as to not just why the dashboard was created, but how that kind of aligns to your district's LCAP or the SIPSAs at your sites. These resources are very helpful. Additionally, there are 2 more Q&A sessions, and I'm not going to ask by show of hands, but I know that I've been on them and they have been very informative. Okay, lots of different questions about application, what to see. And so I find them, although they're informal, they're very robust. And there's another 2 coming up December 6th. And then you've got one on the 13th. And the registration link is provided for you on our PowerPoint. And once again, for those of you who really like to geek out, and one of them is missing, I know, but CalPads, trying to put together and linking CalPads to your dashboard, those resources will also be available. I am aware as of this morning, maybe even like 30 minutes ago, that there are still those indicators that say, I remember it said like coming in November. Now it says coming in December. And I even saw this morning for the LCFF, like coming in January. But stay tuned because I know a lot of those are going to be dropping. And so always coming back to that dashboard toolkit to support like your messaging. It's great. Keep in mind that there's also more information in those additional report sections. The technical mini guide, I know that if you're the dashboard coordinator, you're getting a preview to those. I'm eagerly anticipating suspension and CCNI just to kind of add to my ever building mini guide online tool that I use, but those will be dropping as well. And then the downloadable data files that, as I was saying, kind of will help you to start to frame the narrative for what's going on in your district. As we know that the dashboard, it provides you that satellite level data, right? It gives you an indication of what's happening. I recall though, as a principal at a site, that there were always parents, once you explained to them the indicators and the business rules associated, which took several months, and you have your ELAC community, and you have school site council, then most parents and other educational partners want to know, well, what about my students? How are the students at this site doing? And being able to find that through line between the dashboard and what our actual data at our site was ever so important. And so as we take the next few slides, I wanted to take a minute and get a little bit more interactive. We wanted to zoom in and kind of delve deeper into the specifics of your LEA's data and see how you kind of weave together a compelling narrative when you're trying to illuminate the unique data story that goes on in your educational ecosystem. So if you have your cell phone handy, what we want to do before we kind of get started is we want to talk about the audience. And the audience is very important when it comes to communicating your information. And so what I want to do is take a moment, and if you can with your cell phone, identify the top 3 elements that you find most crucial in effective communication. And it's very broad, and there's only 3 you can list, so you may have to prioritize. But when you are communicating, and we know that most of you do it in several different channels, what are the 3 top elements that you find most crucial when you're trying to effectively communicate? And if I were taking this right now, I would probably be thinking technology as I'm staring up here at 2 different computers. One is not a host, 3 in the back. We have 2 or 3 different Evans on the side to just show you that it's, one of the most effective elements or one of the most important things is to make sure you have technology in place. But take the next moment here and identify the top 3 elements you find most crucial in effective communication. And if we can screen share, let's see what we've got. You can see right in the middle here. I have to step out a little bit. It's hard to see. Clarity. Put together a word cloud here. I see the words moving, but the one staying in the middle: clarity, transparency, technology, timeliness, simplicity of information, relationships, sweet spot of detail. We're going to get to that in a few slides. Visuals, multiple modes, and the channel I see. What we'll do is I'll take a screenshot of that and we'll include it in our DAAN digest just so that you have an idea. But as we were talking about, and if we go back now to our presentation. So as we were saying, some of the most effective ways when you're trying to communicate, one of the first things we were thinking about is the audience, right? Most of us have various audiences in which we have to communicate. And as we're thinking about that, we're thinking about how we're going to be doing it. Like what is the why behind why we're doing this and how the audiences that we're speaking to, we have to keep in mind the process for communication. So when you're thinking about just now, okay, or even think about this morning, I don't know about you, but you think about your spouse. And this morning I had a very clear conversation. The conversation said, this morning, tonight for dinner, we are going to have chicken, some rice, steamed vegetables, and salad. We had the same conversation yesterday. When I came home yesterday, I had the chicken. I told my spouse, be ready for making a salad and steamed vegetables. I came home, my spouse was sitting in a chair and I had the chicken. And I said, so, and they looked at me and of course, maybe you can relate. They said, what are we having for dinner? Somewhere along there in that communication, there was some confusion, right? The message that I'm getting across, which I clearly asked and I said, I didn't check for understanding, which I know I miss now, but I know for sure that I was relaying a message. What I didn't do is I didn't think about the receiver and the noise going on. Even as we're sitting here and we're having a conversation, you may be away from work if you're in person, but we still have noise, right? We still have our cell phones with us and we have to look at our email. Okay, we have family that will need us. If you're in Zoom land, you not only do you have your email and your phone, you have people knocking on the door trying to get into us. And as that's going on, we are trying to deliver dashboard data, important information that's taking up our world. And we don't realize that it has to go all the way through the noise. It has to meet that other person. They have to then like decode it, right? They have to look at it. They have to interpret it. And we want to give information, but most important part of giving information, right, is the feedback. What do they see? What do they glean from it? How can they help us to have a conversation? And so when we're thinking about communicating and the why, we have to kind of keep in mind our audience and how they kind of navigate and how we're going to be kind of organizing that information so that they are understanding and eliciting what we need, give us our feedback. One way to do that is to kind of use this framework. And this is not the only or end all be all of framework that you can use. But when you're thinking about practices for effective communication, I tend to use this framework because I like the idea of the influence and the level of interest. Our educational partners fall into different buckets. And although I was really tempted to put different groups into these areas, I quickly realized that that may not be appropriate and or your LEA may be organized different. And these groups may alternate in other areas. So we could have people that have very high interest, but very low influence. Okay. And these people definitely need information, but they may not need that kind of information as if someone who has high interest and high influence, maybe our superintendents, our CEOs. And so the idea is to kind of use this framework when you're thinking about how you're going to communicate and what it is you're going to be communicating. And then not just the people, but what are you communicating? How is that information going to be coming out? So when you're looking at people with interest that may be on the lower end and lower influence, it's not that they don't need information, but we monitor the volume of information. Most of us in this room and most of us that are in Zoom land, we have the entire story. We know everything, right? And not everyone needs our entire story. So we want to kind of keep a mindful eye of that. Just like if we're looking at people with low interest and high influence, they want to be satisfied. So they need information, but they need it very targeted and very precise and bulleted. Versus the keeping informed who probably need that check-in every day or so and questions and feedback. And then we all know the high interest and high influence. They remind me of like if you watch the news in the morning on TV still, okay? There's that like NASDAQ or weather report ribbon that goes on the bottom, tells you every minute what's happening. Those are the people that we want to manage closely and provide them the information as they need it. And so this is kind of just a framework that we use when we're kind of talking about, what do they need and how do they need it. The biggest takeaway though is the bottom line up front. So starting off the conversation, what I'd like to say is let's start with your last sentence. What is the main point? Put it up front to capture the attention because you only get about 6 seconds, right? Get their attention, hook them in, start to explain and then ask some questions. Not just presenting, but when we're writing, we also want to make sure that we're pretty selective and we try to model this in our DAAN digest or our CalPads connections with headers, bullet points, 5 or less. Email lines. I'm not sure about you, but when I receive an email, the most important part of that email is the subject line. If it says decision needed, take action, that is going to get my attention much more than like, wanted to know how you feel about that. That typically isn't there. So how we decide to communicate and getting out there in an organized fashion and chunking it up is something that we want to start to think about as you guys take this dashboard information and start to kind of curate that with your own LEA's data for that story. So what we wanted to do is take a moment and think about that narrative and give you just a brief moment and talk about crafting that story. Similarly to a narrative where you have characters, a setting, conflict, and instead of resolution, maybe next steps. Crafting that story is going to look very similar. And I decided to use a baseball card that we're familiar with as a way to kind of illuminate this. And so the idea was, when we see that baseball card and we see that there's a 23.6% that are chronically absent, okay, that's giving us information, but then we want to dig a little bit deeper. And when you're looking at your story, you want to know who are the key characters. And sometimes we go to that equity report and we start to dig down and we see that we have homeless, foster youth, 2 or more races, you have African American or students with disabilities. Now we start to personalize your story. And even within those groups, you may have knowledge of other barriers that students within those groups are experiencing that you want to share, because we all know that just because you are a student with disabilities, there's not one universal narrative necessarily that sums up that entire group. So as you're thinking about finding that through line between your dashboard and your own story, keeping in mind the characters, the setting, who is affected by this, okay? And then any sort of work that's been going on since the end of last year to now helps to bring educational partners a little bit more interested in understanding what the district or your LEA has been doing to help them out. Maybe you decided you did a root cause analysis and you realize that you have a new A2A. You've decided to disaggregate your data within A2A more frequently. You've set up maybe data teams now that are strictly and strategically looking at your key characters to understand, what's going on. What I wanted to do is just give everyone maybe a few minutes, because I know that whether you have had chronic absenteeism as an area of concern, say most of us post-pandemic have kind of kept our eyes on it. But I wanted to, see, I can't get the, I am. What I wanted to do is for people that are here, you can talk amongst yourselves. And for those of us that are in Zoom, there are some breakouts. Um, there's some breakouts that we created. And I think the idea was to give some collaboration time so that we can kind of reflect upon the questions that are listed here with regards to chronic absenteeism. And what is that story for your LEA going to look like? What are some of the factors that are contributing potentially to your chronic absenteeism? Are there strategies that you have been implementing to enhance collaboration between two different groups or your educational partners to address absenteeism? Are there new metrics that you guys have decided to use that are giving you a better pulse on students and how they experience attending school? And so we have some breakouts that we were wondering that you can go ahead and join if you are elementary or unified school district or high school district, and take a few minutes to kind of have a conversation with some colleagues to see what their data story is like with regards to chronic absenteeism. And if we're in here, we'll take a few minutes as well.
Yeah, if you're in the room, you are forced to talk with your neighbor. There's no alternative. But if you are in Zoom, go ahead and, if you want to, self-select one of the rooms and join a chat with your like-minded colleagues from similar LEAs. Or if you don't want to join one, you don't want to talk, you can just sit in the main room quietly and read.
Okay, so I think we're all back now. And I know that was kind of short. We can talk for a while about it. In person here, definitely, we saw colleagues pulling up their attendance and kind of starting to dig a little bit deeper into their student groups. I did hear a colleague in the back start to answer the first question about the primary factors, and he said, relationships. And I know we may not have a lot of time right now to debrief every single question. Maybe just in the chat, uh, if we look at the first question, the primary factors that are contributing to chronic absenteeism, in the chat, maybe put down, if you're in Zoom, give us an idea. What might some of those primary factors still be that are contributing to your chronic absenteeism? And I'll offer, if there's anyone in person who'd like to come on mic and maybe share what that looks like, please feel free. I know we have a mic up here, and we also have Evan, who has a mic in his hand.
We are finding at the high school level that our students who are out for extended absences are mostly suffering from very high levels of anxiety.
Thank you. And so I think looking at that, and I'm not going to dig into how did we determine that, if there was a root cause analysis kind of going on, but being able to speak to your district story, being able to craft that narrative and explain what you're noticing, what you've implemented since last year, and what your hopes are or your goals may be as they relate to your LCAP. Definitely helps to bring and bridge the communication with your educational partners. What I'll do is I'll look in the chat when I get back to our seat to see what else may be there, and we are more than happy to put that into our DAAN digest as well. But without further ado, I'm going to call up Stephen. Join us. I'm trying to get to the next slide. Go. Learning opportunities. I think Evan did touch upon these. We do have our charter symposium on February 6th in 2024. And if you are in Zoom land or you're here and you are a charter school and interested, please check it out and register. It is free to everyone. I know that we'll be there along with a few of our other groups within our division. We look forward to that. And once again, we do have on the March 6th and 7th, our district convening. You do not need to be a DA district, but we will be all together as a LACOE team. They're kind of supporting and providing information as it relates to specific topics, more information forthcoming. And our team, as Evan already said, and here are some shiny faces to go with it. We're happy to be here and we love to help and to serve. Please, if you need a conversation and you'd rather talk with us, use the QR code. Please make a booking with us. I know we're going to be meeting later directly after this meeting to support another LEA. So we're always here to help you out. We already took our break. Now, Stephen, please. No, this is a good question.
Yeah, so unfortunately, after we'd already picked our dates, the CDE announced that they had the same dates as us in LA, but no, it's a different conference and it's a differentiated assistance convening for any districts in LA County. It's district specific, not for charter schools. Charters have their own symposium in February. For whether it's a district that was in DA this year, may not be eligible for differentiated assistance next year, but would still like to join us. We'll have a list of the special breakouts and who will have as speakers, but it's designed to basically build on the existing processes that were started last year as part of differentiated assistance and a continuation. And yeah, unfortunately, we have our CD colleagues are showing up at the same time. So a little bit of conflict, but hopefully they're just down the street from maybe you could hit both.
All right, assessment and assessment unit updates. I'm glad to be going after a skipped break, and I hope you can take that break in your head while I am presenting. I am Stephen Bartlett. I apologize that my colleague Stephanie was not able to be here today. She sends her regards, and we're both available, of course, for contact with your assessment needs, and you can reach either of us at those emails or assessment@lacoe.edu is a way you can reach the both of us. We're going to talk a little bit about CAASPP and ELPAC updates and reminders from RAN, from Coffee Sessions, from CDE Communications. Coffee Sessions is an ETS structure that you'll see monthly, a great resource. One of our colleagues for Region 11 for our region for LA County, Marcus Bentecourt, I believe, is in the room. He's got a set of slides and a presentation he's going to provide directly after myself. I apologize beforehand for any overlap that I've caused, and we'll see what we've got. He's always completely extraordinary and capable, and we look forward to that. But there may accidentally be a little bit of overlap, but we'll see. We'll also talk about some professional learning opportunities and allow you to plug into some of those or have your staff do that. If we're looking at CAASPP updates first, you should know that your test administration window should have been set already. The deadline for that was in the past. It was December 1st. You have to contact Marcus in order to set that up. Now, if you missed that deadline or missed a part of that setup, one of the most common ways to miss that setup is to not attach schools to the different windows that you've created. So if that's a piece that you missed, you'll have to contact ETS. If we're looking at new systems or new materials that CDE's got provided, one of the new piece of information that they've released recently is an updated California assessment system list. This is updated for the current school year. It was formerly a web document. It's now a web page and can be updated more timely a manner. That's the structure the whole system's kind of moving towards. You used to see those PDFs of manuals, and now it's web-based manuals. That allows them to update just line item rather than the entire thing and create a new publish date. One of the things you want to look at is CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessment. CAST being CAAST, the science test. I'm sure you're aware of this by now, but if you're not, these are new assessments for California that became available in October, and They are now available for use. They had a rolling up or open where they were available to see, but now they're available to use. You can score, administer them, and generate results. Not all the results are in the system yet. I believe that's the next slide. There are materials that support that administration, the DFAs and TOMs, hand scoring items, in the teacher hand scoring system and the data entry interface. DEI would be LPAC only. Results will show in the California Educator Reporting System about 20 minutes after administration or completion for those tests that have been scored. So LPAC have more hand scoring requirements, and so anything that has a hand scoring requirement has to be hand scored before we have a score in TOMS. This data is available for completed CAST and LPAC interim assessments. The overall scores, performance levels, custom aggregate reports, key and distractor analysis for selected response items. What's not available is the full scope of data, and that full scope of data, the overall scales, the test items, student responses, that's going to be viewable in SIRS in early 2024. ISRs, individual student reports, those printouts that simulate the SSRs, but are usable maybe for a parent conference. Those won't be available until July of 2024, so effectively next school year. If we look at how our districts are using these, I want to ask you if you are using them. CDE provided some notes on interim assessment use across districts this current year. It was really neat to see that that information. A lot of our local LA County districts are extensively using interim assessments, and that rate has been going up year over year. If you look at state board analysis of their use, we want to ask you how you're using it. So there is a survey, I believe, online. If you are in person and in the Zoom at the same time, we'd encourage you to, I believe it's a Zoom survey. We'd encourage you to respond to the survey in the Zoom, but as a matter of hands, maybe we can ask and add your response to the responses that we're getting online. Has your district used CAST, the science interim assessment so far this year? Raise your hand if you're in the room and are not on Zoom and you're using the CAST interims. So it looks like a few. Has your district used LPAC interim assessment so far this year? Anyone in the room who's not, have you? Awesome. Okay. Do you plan to use CAST interim assessments this year, later on this year? Okay. At least one. Do you plan to use LPAC interim assessments this year? I see some nodding heads. What do you anticipate might be the challenges for use of the CAST and the LPAC interim assessments, if any? If you could raise your hand and express any challenges you might have. Yeah. Yeah, hand scoring.
So yeah, just to reiterate, the comment from the room for those on Zoom was that can't be made mandatory since the hand scoring system does add a level, but it's highly recommended from at least one of our LEAs.
One advantage of the interims is the that hand scoring can be done without certification. So that does certification is a time commitment for staff, but the interim assessments don't require that certification.
Stephen, do you see the results on your monitor?
I don't.
Okay, I don't know why, but I did share. I'm sharing. Hopefully, some folks can see. But just to kind of quickly go through, of the respondents online. Currently, only 12% of the respondents had administered the CAASPP interim assessment so far, whereas 44% of our LEAs had administered the LPAC interim assessment. And in terms of the intent, about 43% intend to administer the CAASPP this year, 72% intend to administer the LPAC interim assessment. So we have feeling some love for the LPAC interim assessments. I didn't look at the individual responses to that final question as far as impediments to implementation, but we'll share those out with our DAAN Digest follow-up.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. There is an interim assessment video series that's been updated. They sent ETS sent out an email on this. This is a series of videos, great videos, giving you some introductions to those interim assessments. I recommend checking it out. There are a few videos in the list that are upcoming, coming soon. The viewing system, how to administer CAASPP interim assessments, and how to use teacher hand scoring system, but the rest are all released recently. So check that out. Some tips for LPAC CAASPP administration. The interim assessments are, of course, available. The pause rules guide and the expiration rules guide have been updated for the current year. So check those out for the summative administration that's upcoming. And you can find all the coordinator emails in the archive on each of those LPAC and CAASPP websites. A few more reminders for if you are looking at resources to guide your efforts. Checklists that CD or ETS publishes are extraordinarily useful. This is timely reminders that would correspond with some of those checklists. It's important to be communicating with your special education staff, reviewing IEPs and 504 plans before administration of CAASPP and LPAC summative assessments. If you've separated 504 from, of course, those are general ed plans, be sure that you're working with both responsible parties. You're going to make sure that you're adding users and TOMs about right now if you haven't done it so far. Great thing to do very early in the school year, so all the features of SIRS are available to your teacher, and your teachers can access their own students' results from prior years in SIRS early in the school year, and they use that to drive understanding of student progress. Test assignments need reviewed right now to ensure that students who are assigned the alternate LPAC, the alternate CAA, the CAA, or the CAS alternate assessment for science are appropriately assigned. Those all, of course, take the alt for all logic and will use the same type of assessment for all assessments. So either alternate for all assessments or the general assignment for all. Looking forward or looking back in time for California alternate assessment for science administration, this is a reminder that this is a year-long administration that started in September, and something that is intended to be aligned with curriculum that's been built, and those tasks should be following related instruction. This structure is the only assessment in the CAASPP and LPAC suite that has this structure, that it has the curriculum embedded structure. So it may take some extra effort in order to ensure that it gets embedded into the curriculum in that way, some extra planning. Although I say that structure is probably one of the more exciting structures for California assessment, and something that you want to make sure works. So it might lead to future growth in assessment. I'd say has a lot of opportunity for future growth. There is a CDE-led virtual training series starting December 7th. Pretest training series is a what's new for CAASPP and LPAC, and it'll go over the new features. If we go on to look at LPAC updates, a few deadlines that are looming. This week, we have the LPAC AST certification deadline. That's this Friday, December 8th. Next Friday is the alternate LPAC administering AST administration scoring training certification. That deadline coming up for any LDA that uses the alternate LPACs. So if you don't use those, or you use another district to complete those, you would have to certify that you have somebody to do that. Those are great trainings. If you are not the one who has done the training and done the certification for your LA, but you're responsible for the logistics of that, for making LPAC or CAASPP happen, I recommend those certification trainings, even if your district or your LEA has already completed the requirement of one person having done it within the last couple of years. Another reminder that may overlap Marcus, initial LPAC RSVP, some details on dates here. So probably better to read through these on your own. They have to do with shipping and which ones are excluded and which ones are included. I'll let you check out that on your own time. The slides are all together in the DAAN folder. You know, of course, that the ordering of K-2 writing domain materials has a deadline that's also looming. There is a template, of course, that gives you counts that you expect. It's just a matter of filling that out based on expected counts. I always used to do a count that ended in a 1. So instead of 28, I would put 21. That would give me or 31, that would give me extra extra materials. So they always round up to 10 extra materials without having it count against me in terms of the excess material fees. So excess material fees have been reinstated this year. And so be aware of that when placing those orders. If you miss that deadline, you have to do it through a supplemental order window. I believe there's a note on when those come in. So those will come in. Anything that's been ordered previously by 11:30, that should arrive the week of the 11th, and anything ordered by the 18th should arrive the first week of January. Also, on my last slide, I failed to note, you want to make sure your test examiners are calibrating annually. Those new and experienced examiners need to calibrate in Moodle annually. Also, there are picture cards that are available for download or order, and those are new for the alternates. All right, a few tips on stairs. There are continuing issues with SSIDs that have been that are associated with students who have been misidentified in CalPads. As that process for identification of students increases in capacity to match students, maybe these numbers will go down, but this is a continuing thing that you need to keep abreast of, both as a CalPads coordinator or as an LPAC coordinator, and some details on what to do about each of these situations when a student has tested with the wrong SSID or a retired SSID using a SSID that's been retired. Another issue that that Marcus will probably mention is an issue that's a call driver, I believe. So DEI for the data entry interface, individuals are accidentally entering data for interims when they intend to enter data for an initial, or entering data into initials when they intend to enter information into a interim, just be aware that those are different, and the data needs to be entered separately. And I'm not able to change the slide to the next slide. Are we on? Okay. Okay, personalized video student score report. So I know that this is not really new, but it was taken over by I believe Pearson, or excuse me, it was taken over by a different company. So it was the company that was doing this was sold, and it disappeared for a little bit and came back and is now reintroduced. I want to promote this, and I want to say that these are nifty videos that you can personalize with your logos and information about your school, and it can go straight to your email or your text messages for a parent. I don't know. I mean, if I were to sit here and show you how many clicks I have to do through my parent portal to get to my student's score report, and how detached that is from from the email or piece of paper that says they're available, um, having the ability to click on something that's very intuitive, clear, and gives us scores with a lot of clarity is, I think, absolutely worth $1 per student, just a little less than twice the cost of a stamp. So I recommend these. I'd say get your get your students this, get your parents this, and become part of this program. You have to sign up for it. You have to make yourself receive these, and you have to do a little work in terms of providing phone numbers or contact information. But absolutely good program. I recommend it. Get it done for your LEA. With that, I believe all I have left are a few opportunities for professional learning. We've got the Canvas catalog for assessment unit offerings, that and the accountability and data literacy catalog. There's a few links there. The new coordinator training coming up this next week, December 11th. If you have experienced these online, I believe this is a virtual training. You may be aware that 6 hours online is a long time, and the structure of these you'll see starting in the summer may change to be a monthly, approximately 1 hour structure for new coordinator training. So look forward to that. If you have any ideas or suggestions for that, I'd be happy to relay those to the team responsible for restructuring new coordinator trainings into a more frequent but less less lengthy structure. So I believe that's it. And if we have a way to introduce Marcus, I believe that would be next.
Does Marcus really need an introduction?
Absolutely, and the man, he needs no introduction.
Marcus, you have co-hosts. You want to come off mute and share your screen? You're welcome to.
Sure. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you, Stephen, for the kind words as well. Appreciate it. So as a kickoff, I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat here the CAASPP coordinator checklist and the LPAC coordinator checklist. This is the LEA level checklist. Just want to make sure that all the LEA coordinators have direct access to that. So I've shared the links right now in the meeting chat here, and I'm going to go ahead and share screen and get started with the presentation. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just some of the things. Stephen actually covered a lot of what I've already was going to mention in the presentation. So kudos to him and Stephanie as well. They do a spectacular job of taking the information already available from our sites and integrating it pretty flawlessly into their presentations as well. So just a couple things, some good housekeeping here. We have all of our CAASPP and LPAC manuals available there. Feel free to, I'll be sending this link as well to Hillary so that she'll be able to integrate it to their notes as well. So these links will all be selectable once I've sent that. So now we have a couple different things here that I like to go over. So we have a get answers section. We also have our virtual assistant, Anita, that's always available to answer any questions. We typically update our virtual assistant on a pretty regular basis regarding questions that we receive from the field and any other questions that LEAs might pose to us as well. And we update that database pretty frequently, probably about a monthly to bi-monthly basis. If you need to contact myself or my other counterpart, Dina Becerra, at any point, if you contact the 800-955-2954 number and then you select Region 11 when prompted to on the phone voice recording, that'll take you directly to myself. If I'm unavailable or working with another LEA coordinator at the time, please feel free. I believe it's going to send you directly to Dina, so go ahead and stay on the line, and then you should be able to receive her. If not, please feel free and don't hesitate to leave a voicemail. I usually check those throughout the day as well. And then my fastest method, excuse me, of reply is usually through email, which is the region11@ets.org. That's my preferred method, and it's going to be the fastest way to reach me. I typically respond within about 5 to 10 minutes of receiving an email. So this is just an overview for adding users for CAASPP and LPAC. Just wanted to go over that one more time. It's always nice to have a reminder of it as well. So please make sure if you're adding users either manually or through the upload, making sure that all of their information is correct, specifically their email address, because that's what's going to tie their role to when they receive password resets, anything of that nature. So you want to make sure that all of the information is correct as well. When you're doing a file upload, you'll need to validate that file first. That's going to allow us to check for any errors or inconsistencies or any values that are not valid in the file itself. So please be aware that you're going to need to validate first. What's going to happen typically is you'll receive an email notification, and in the body of that notification, if all records are accepted, that blue upload button will appear when you go back to Tom's. If there's any errors, you're going to receive the email, and it'll show, depending on how many errors are listed in that file, if there's any errors, it'll show records rejected. You'll have to go back into Tom's, selecting the error button, and you'll have to check and make sure that you edit and correct those errors before revalidating again and then uploading. So once a user has been successfully uploaded added manually, what will happen is the user is going to receive 2 emails. The first email is going to state what role they've been added as for which school site. And then that second email is going to contain the actual secure verification link, which is going to be highlighted in blue. Now that link remains active for about 30 minutes. If they don't retrieve and sign in and create their credentials within the 30 minutes, that is totally okay. What's going to happen though, however, is the secure verification link will no longer be active, but in the body of that email, it will instruct them on how to retrieve a new active link, which will be sent immediately to them. And then as the users receive those emails, just make sure that they're checking their junk or spam inbox. And if the URL is not whitelisted, please make sure that URL is whitelisted. Typically, it's from, I believe, CA at assessments do not reply most of the time. So just make sure that any URLs in which password resets are sent, those are whitelisted, so it'll show up in the regular inbox as opposed to the junk or spam inbox for a user. Continuing with some of the login procedures. So once they've been assigned the role, the test administrator role or any other role, site coordinator, LEA, and so forth, what's going to need to happen is when they receive the secure verification link, they need to click on that link if it's active. It's going to take them to their login credentials and sign-ins. And then they're going to have to not only create their login credentials, but ensure that they're fully logging into TOMS, meaning that they get to the landing page or the home page of TOMS, because that's where the security forms are going to be presented before they access that. If they don't complete the security forms, typically what happens is when they try to log into the TA interface, they're not going to see any of the test selections based on the role that was assigned, because those forms have not been completed at least 30 to 60 minutes prior. So just be aware of that. I know I like to try to eliminate as much stress as I can before the actual administration. So just make sure your users are at least 30 to 60 minutes completing those forms before they access the TA interface, because again, those tests will not appear for them until they've submitted those. Now, to verify that they've actually completed those forms, you can access the security forms and remote administration status report in TOMS. That's actually going to give you a complete overview in a spreadsheet, which will include the date and time in which the form was completed and submitted. So just make sure that if you need to check at any point, you can, and then you can remind your users that haven't signed or completed yet to please do so as soon as possible. Just a couple things on the initial RSVP process. I know Stephen covered some of this as well. So with the RSVP, please note that students who are tested before October 34th, on October 31st or before, any booklets dated for that will need to be returned before December 11th. So as long as it's postmarked by, I believe, the 9th or the 10th, it should be acceptable. So just remember that any students after October 31st, those do not need to be sent in, but any students tested before October 31st or on, those can still be sent. And then those pre-ID labels that have been identified in the sampling plan, those are automatically going to be sent to your LEAs. Now, this is just covering some of the summative LPAC aspects of it. So this is a question I received from the field a lot of the time regarding specifically student demographic information. Now, as the summative LPAC window kind of draws closer, just make sure that your student demographic information has been uploaded from CalPADS at least 48 hours prior to testing. Please note, though, however, with this information being uploaded, it's typically during the business hours and business days, so not on weekends. For example, if your LEA, CalPADS administrator or coordinator updates or a file to be sent to TOMS and to be uploaded, typically that will not be processed until Monday morning, and then those students will most likely not appear until Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning at the latest, because it is not weekend updates, it is business hours and business days. As we're going through the summative LPAC test materials order, just wanted to remind you that kindergarten through 2 will require answer booklets be ordered. Grades 3 through 12 do not require answer booklets. They are specifically tested all online. So please note that as well when you go to place your current primary order window, which is open until December 18th. And then after that, it's going to be in January, which the supplemental order window opens for orders. Quick note, summative LPAC DFAs will be made available on January 9th in TOMS for download. This was addressed in our last coffee session that we also had, so I just wanted to give you that specific update. All of those LPAC DFAs will be made available for TOMS and download under the resources button in TOMS on January 9th. So these are some information regarding the pre-ID labels for those kindergarten through 2nd grade students that you'll be testing. So based on these 2 production dates, January 13th, and that should say 2024, I'm sorry, we haven't updated that yet, and March 10th, students who will be testing for summative and have generated a score report from their initial, between those 2 dates, they're going to receive the pre-ID label. So you can expect to receive pre-ID labels created on January 13th, starting February 3rd. And then those students after, created on March 10th, should be expecting those to arrive at your LEA at March 31st. Again, I apologize that it still reflects 2023. It should be reflecting 2024 shortly. This goes for both CAASPP and the LPAC side of things. So I wanted to go over this specifically regarding the, again, student demographics. I make a large point, and I try to stress this a lot because it's something that I'm experiencing a lot with some LEAs and a lot of calls and call drivers and emails and chats that we're getting from the field. Just making sure that all the demographic information is up to date. As you receive students through the year and they need a test for initial, please note the circled, highlighted area right there where it has TBD and the primary language. A lot of the time what happens is students will enroll in an LEA, but for some reason the CalPADS file that they upload either is blank for the ELAS status or the English language acquisition status and the primary language, or they're listed as TBD, but in the primary language field, they'll actually have English. In order for a student to be eligible for the initial, they must have TBD in their ELAS status, and then the primary language must be listed anything other than English, and that also includes ASL, American Sign Language. Please note again, I like stressing this, updates must be made in CalPADS in order to reflect this in TOMS. With TOMS being a read-only system and the way we receive information from CalPADS, we can't change any information in TOMS, unfortunately, because it only imports what is being fed to us from CalPADS. So please be aware and work with your CalPADS coordinator closely just to ensure that all the information is being updated correctly. Now, this is specific to accommodations and or alternate assessments. Now, this goes for both CAASPP and LPAC. So in order for students to have access to the accommodations, whether they be embedded or non-embedded, you just want to make sure that the special education for testing and the CalPAD special education reflects yes for those fields. That's going to allow them to gain access to those accommodations and for those alternate assessments if they are required or need to be assigned an alternate assessment. So just please make sure that those fields are reflecting correctly. And then to further expand on a point that Stephen had mentioned regarding alternate for all, he's correct. The way that works is the student will be, if they're assigned an alternate LPAC, they will also need to be automatically assigned to the alternate assessment for ELA Math or for CAST. Students can't take an alternate assessment for one testing program and then the general assessments for another. It's either alt for all or general assessments for all. So please make sure that you're checking that as well, because sometimes the CAASPP and LPAC, specifically the summative LPAC, those overlap. So if a student starts one test before, say if they start CAASPP before, they're automatically going to be taking the general summative assessment. They won't be taking alternate. I've included this as well because I know there are some new test examiners and test administrators there as well. This is something specifically that relates to STARS that I wanted to make a point of because it helps kind of save a lot of time and energy in filing STARS, specifically when it comes to test settings. So I've included a couple of illustrations, a couple of screen captures as well regarding that. So as you can see there where it has the please note, there is an eye or an eyeball icon that allows a test administrator to verify test settings. So this is the point in which it's going to help either approve or deny a student. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide here, and it should show that there. So this is what the TA interface will look like on the approval and test settings page on the TA interface side. So if you click on that eyeball icon, what will happen is it's going to show all the test settings that were either added in TOMS or uploaded through a file upload in TOMS for that student. Now, one point I do want to make is for interim assessments that they're using, the test settings can be manipulated, turned on and off before the actual administration. You can upload them in TOMS still, and it still will reflect in the student profile on the TA interface, but the TA can actually turn on and off before any interim assessment test settings because it's an interim test environment. Now, when they check on the eyeball icon and they see that the student does not have the correct test settings, do not approve that student. go ahead and check with either your site coordinator or your LEA level coordinator regarding those test settings, because what we don't want to do is specifically in a summative environment, whether it be summative LPAC or for the CAASPP testing, the smarter balance testing, we do not want to approve a student and then find out that their test settings aren't working as intended or added. That's what this eyeball icon is there for, to check before you approve a student. Because if a student goes into a test and they don't have the proper test settings, that results in a stairs. They have to reset the entire test so that the test setting can actually reflect. So you just want to make sure that you're checking that eyeball icon. It's very important, and it's going to save you a lot of time and energy in stairs cases. So that's why I like to bring that up. So this kind of comes to the CAASPP side of things for the interim assessments. So if you're using ICAs, please make sure that both the interim test and the performance task of that ICA is completed. Unfortunately, scores will not result if you just do a performance task part of an ICA or just the computer-based part of it. Both of those of that same opportunity must be completed in order for the score data to populate. And if there is any required hand scoring, you want to make sure that that is completed as well and submitted before looking for the scores and SIRs. This is specific just to the TA side of things and the test administrators. In order for any test administrator to view student score data and SIRs, the student groups must be created and uploaded by either the site coordinator or the LEA level coordinator. So TAs do not have the same level of access as a site coordinator just to look up a student alone by their SSID. LEA coordinators and site coordinators only have that viewability. TAs must have a student group added in order for them to see any of the data populate. I also included the teacher hand scoring system as well. There have been, I've heard from many of you in the field regarding the new layout. We're still, I wouldn't say working on it directly, but it is a new layout and it's not as familiar as the past layout and functionality of the THSS. There's been a couple updates and some differences from this year's to previous administration years. So just be aware of that as well. The way it works for this year is if a student didn't provide a written response to the writing prompt, and this would be applicable to writing prompts for either CAASPP or for LPAC, typically what's going to happen is the item's not going to show up on the response list, and no hand scoring would need to be done because they didn't respond to that. It actually will reflect a blank white screen as well. So just a couple of things to wrap it up here. Some upcoming information for CAASPP. As Stephen did mention, the deadline for creating the CAASPP Summative Test Administration window has passed. The good news is a lot of our outreach has actually, we got a lot of response to that, and basically a lot of Region 11, and congratulations to everybody here. You finished it or either reached out to myself or Dina regarding the completion of the window, and a lot of it's been done. So hats off to you for that. So you definitely have been very, very responsive to our outreach, and you've completed all of that as well and completed your window. And again, I like to touch base on this, just ensuring that all student demographic information is updated at least a minimum of 24 to 48 hours prior. So just be aware of that. I like to stress that a lot because that's many LEAs are under the impression that sometimes when the student is uploaded from CalPads, they'll be able to test next day, but there are certain things that we need to get through as far as making sure the student information is updated in TOMS and then so forth, and then the test delivery system. So just be aware of that. You're updating your information as soon as possible so that we have less stress during testing, and we can allow that to move a little bit smoother. Upcoming on the LPAC side. So the summative LPAC testing window is going to open on February 1st and go through May 31st. At this time, summative LPAC materials orders for the primary orders for kindergarten through second grade can still be placed up until December 18th. After that date, on January 12th, that's when the supplemental summative LPAC materials order will begin and be open. Any questions?
We do have some questions in the chat, and
Sure.
I think Steven's got a mic as well. So between the two of you, Let me just pop it open. Stephen, you want to go back to Molly's question about the short form? Do you see that one? At 10:58. Sorry, we were
Sure, no problem. Yeah, let me go back here real quick.
a while there. So
Not a problem.
The question is,
ye-
do we know
yes,
if SBAC assessments are still using the shorter form this year? And the answer is yes. And
yes, that's correct.
no expectation for that to change, or no movement in the direction of extending the form.
Not at this current time, no.
and they'll be able to produce a composite domain scores, correct?
That is, I believe, the project that's ongoing, and is intended to inform SSRs in the subsequent year.
Okay. Question, what is the deadline to order large print Braille for summative LPAC or smarter summative?
I believe it's still within the same December 18th deadline, but I can definitely double check. Large
Is there
print is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is there a different deadline for smarter summative? Marcus,
I don't believe so. Typically, I know that we've taken anything for large print or special order. I know that we've taken emails and any requests that they may have. I believe that's on a case by case LEA basis at this point. There's not a larger order window like there is for LPAC.
So for the K2 writing domain materials for the summative LPAC, Braille and large print are embedded into that template for ordering for the primary window.
Oh, I thought you were referring to CAASPP. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question asked both. For LPAC, it looks like December 18th. CAASPP, Marcus, you're saying probably around the same date, or open?
So on the CAASPP side, I know that we're taking requests from the LEAs as far as for the large print or the special version. And I know December 18th for the Summit of LPAC, large print and the special version is listed there. So December 18th is when the window closes for not just the regular booklets, but also the large print and the special version as well. And then January 12th, when the supplemental window opens, it should be listed there as well.
I don't know if you know this one, Marcus. This may be a CD question. Is there a plan to update the alternate LPAC student score reports to break out student results by task type?
Is there a specific parameters that they're looking for?
The receptive or expressive task type.
Okay, I see that here from Kevin. Okay. Yeah, I can definitely check on that. I don't believe that there's going to be an update regarding the alternate LPAC SSRs, but I can definitely find that out for you, Kevin, and I can get back to you via email if that's okay.
Thank you. A couple more. I'm making these assessment specific since we have you right up against our drop dead time here. But if a student starts his or her summative LPAC with a special ed status in February, but is determined later that he or she is no longer eligible, when he or she takes the CAASPP in April, will he or she still be a SPED student in TOMS?
That's a great question. So if they started the Summit of LPAC and it was determined at a later point that they're going to be taking the general assessments, is from what I'm understanding the question is, what's going to happen is you'd have to actually file the stairs to have the LPAC test that was completed or the alternate LPAC, because again, it falls under the specifications of alt for all or general assessments for all.
Yeah, I think we need to also dig in because this isn't necessarily an alternate LPAC or alternate Cal Alt question. It could just be a student who started with a SPED status.
Oh, SPED status. Okay, gotcha. That would be dependent also on if the special education status was going to be applicable for accommodations or for or alternate assessment. So as far as I know, for the accommodation side of things, they can still take a general assessment with accommodations, but when it comes to the alternate assessment specifically for test assignment purposes, it's definitely falling under the alt for all or the general assessments for all.
Thank you. Two more questions.
Yeah.
One specific one from Danielle. She'd previously emailed about students who were repeating a grade, want to ensure that they wouldn't encounter any testing issues in CAASPP or the summit of LPAC. You advised by looking up SSIDs of these students under the testing status tab in the student profile, it will display if the students are registered for testing for this year. Are you referring to Tom's or SIRS or somewhere else? I'm guessing that's Tom's.
Correct. Hi, Danielle. Yeah, I do recall that email from Stephanie. And yes, so the way that works is that if the student who is repeating a grade, you'll actually be able to see in Tom's under their profile under the testing status tab if they're actually assigned to that. And I believe even though they are being held, if I remember the question correctly, they took summative LPAC last year, they're being retained for this year's grade as well. They would still test for this year, but specifically, you'd be able to see under that testing status tab if they're registered as well.
And final question, I think Stephen and I may know this one. Will the CAASPP test administrator training be available in Moodle again? That's a generic CAASPP training. Did SCOE say they're going to update that?
Yeah, that'll be updated. I don't know the data release though.
Yeah, but that is forthcoming. That's a handy tool to have if you're doing training.
Mhm.
You don't have to go through. It doesn't require a key, I don't think, right? Wasn't it just posted? I think it's publicly. You don't have to provide your test administrators with the key to access that. It's a really handy overview of CAASPP administration that should be published soon. And that's it. I thank everybody for hanging in there with us. Those of you who are still with us, that's a lot to get through. Marcus, thank you as always for joining us from Santa Cruz. Is that where you are?
Yes, I'm currently in the Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay Area.
And those of you who are in Zoom land, we'll see you at our next in-person meeting, if not sooner. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with an email. For those of you in the room, I think there's still some coffee left for your drive home. But we thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.